Low-tech, no-tech, or simple architecture comprises built forms that are notably absent of mechanical supplements or complex interfaces. In other words, it is the opposite of high-tech. However, technology, or the application of knowledge for practical purposes, is a term always relative to its time and place, and will inevitably expand and evolve depending on its solvent culture. Once society shares a common basis, something that was previously considered high technology might not seem so advanced anymore. Author Julia Watson introduces the notion that technology has become more so a myth than a science. Much like a story, ideals of industrial tycoons have been passed down by those in power and established a worldview that believes in conquering nature for the sake of social progress and comfort. Resultingly, our contemporary understanding of technological practice has become synonymous with machinery. As a low-tech alternative, Watson refers to traditional ecological knowledge found in cultures sheltered from industrialization by their remoteness. Traditional ecological knowledge is seen particularly in indigenous forms of architecture that result from an acute awareness of local environmental specificities. Low-tech architecture generally consists of structures that are simply built using local, natural materials and use passive solutions for climate control. However, the definition varies greatly depending on context and cultures, as the availability of materials or technology is not always the same. Therefore, it is generally easier to define low-tech through a number of factors that can be applied in any setting. Low-tech buildings use natural or recycled materials and are, quote, simple and affordable. They also use historic building methods, making structures low cost and specific to their location. Crucially, low-tech buildings use passive solutions for heating and cooling in order to maintain a comfortable internal environment. It is important that the building process involves the local community and their construction knowledge in order for it to be a self-sustaining structure in the future.
The origin of low-tech as a style is hard to distinguish. In its purest form, low-tech architecture and vernacular architecture are one and the same. They both use local, natural materials, are specific to their location and culture, involve a participative building process, and only use passive technologies for controlling internal conditions. Low-tech architecture has evolved to encompass a very wide range of buildings with a large range of standards depending on their context. As technology evolves, becoming cheaper and more widespread, the definition of low-tech architecture will inevitably expand and evolve yet again. Innovations in low-tech architecture are not so much about developing new materials, but rather about manufacturing existing ones in new ways. There is increasing exploration into how we can, quote, rethink ancient techniques using the technology and research that we possess today. Low-tech architecture is highly sustainable, as it is typically self-constructed and by definition uses natural or recycled materials that are found locally. Low-tech structures are also socially sustainable, as they are built and maintained by the people who use them. There are two main alternatives to low-tech architecture: high-tech and, quote, the middle way. High-tech architecture is the antithesis of low-tech. Structures employ the latest technological advances to produce buildings that are smart and create optimal conditions for the users without any physical interaction. They are also seen as a one-size-fits-all approach with no cultural appropriation. The other alternative to low-tech is architecture that is neither low nor high-tech, but rather somewhere in between. These structures usually have a high level of planning and may also use some technologies attributed to high-tech architecture, but not to such an extent and in combination with some passive systems.
Most of the constructions in Cuba can be considered low technology, either because the tropical climate allows it or because of the economic conditions of the country. Nowadays, many constructions take inspiration from the native architecture such as the barrios. For example, the restaurant El Aljibe. Low technology in Cuba is expressive in many ways. It can be found in additions or modifications to the home themselves, whether at the outset of the city or in the center of it. A low-tech construction can also seen more strongly in rural areas, where climatic conditions are further considered. After the revolutionary drumbeat, it was necessary to solve the housing problem with simple, standard, and low-resource solutions. Microbrigades were created. People who did not belong to construction learned to build their housing under the tutelage of specialists. Example of this is Alamar. According to the conditions of each country, this can be considered low technology. The promise of low technology is that everyone can build, and is nourished by passive solutions, locals, and simple materials. In addition to way of making nouns, it is generally an accessible architecture. And during the special period, the economic challenge meant for Cubans to be resourceful, innovative, and give DIY solutions, to be resilient in general. Low tech is challenged by globalization and innovation in the fields of technology. Low technology aims to provide sustainable solutions to human needs, reduce the demands for special or important materials. It is profitable construction over time.
Here, two low-tech examples illustrate contextual specificity of buildings with a highly singular purpose. The simple straw and guano frond construction of Cuban tobacco barns is optimized for air curing of the crop during the dry season. The louvered curing rooms of fish drying shacks in coastal Iceland are oriented towards sea breezes, while the massive stone walls and heavy turf roofs stabilize it against storm winds. Both architectures depict simple but optimized forms that perform specific cultural functions. Because of their high specificity to local conditions and use, they continue to be viable contemporary designs without the need for more modern technologies. The greenhouse, being a staple of agricultural practice throughout the world, serves as a built metaphor for how unique contexts shape their low-tech architecture. Becoming common in Cuba during the special period, mesh growing houses are a simple, almost undesigned architecture that keeps crops free of insects without pesticides while also deflecting direct sun and withstanding hurricane winds thanks to their porosity. Meanwhile, winter growing houses in the Chinese interior utilize a glass arc roof to maximize solar gain, which is retained by the use of thermal mass walls. Though the Chinese greenhouse illustrates a low-tech use of simple and natural materials for its intended function and place, it is of course rather inappropriate to the hotter, sunnier Cuban climate. In conclusion, while more complex or mechanized modern alternatives are certainly available in many cases, the application of low-tech architecture offers affordable and widely accessible applications that arguably satisfy a broader spectrum of sustainability criteria.